So today we're diving into, well, a really ambitious, unified theory of human social evolution. It's drawn from the sources of Shaoyang Lin.
Right. And it's ambitious because the author isn't viewing history as just, a series of chaotic, unconnected events.
No, not at all. It's treated more like a study of natural laws.
Exactly. Like there's a predictable process, a clear trajectory from our earliest social structures right up to, well, right up to tomorrow's governance systems.
And the whole frame for this deep dive, really, is what the author calls the historical liberation of individual consciousness.
We're basically charting humanity's journey away from a raw state of nature, moving through these systems of centralized power and heading toward a global civilization that's defined by individual freedom.
And this evolutionary pressure, the sources argue, is what's really forcing the issue today. It's pushing us to upgrade our foundational systems of governance.
And this all hinges on a core paradox, which is a great hook. The author lays out this really dramatic distinction between two kinds of societies that have, dominated history.
The power society and the civilization society.
And the difference is all about what they prioritize. It's that simple. The power society, where our sort of primal animal nature is more in control. It's just obsessed with securing natural resources.
Ah, okay. So that explains colonialism.
It explains colonialism, resource wars, the entire pursuit of hegemony. Its whole logic is extractive. Take what you can.
But the civilization society, that runs on a totally different fuel.
Completely different. Its logic requires brain resources.
So ideas.
Ideas, a free environment for those ideas to flourish, free trade, a global atmosphere of cooperation. It's not about grabbing land anymore. It's about enabling intellectual capacity.
When the goal shifts from, say, oil wells to innovation, the entire rulebook has to change.
And that change, that shift in what we value, is what the sources say is driving so much of the political turmoil we see right now.
Which brings us to the front line of this evolution.
Yeah, what the author calls the upgrade of the U.S. national operating system.
Specifically labeled the Trump version.
The Trump version.
Okay, so to be really clear for you listening, we are just relaying the author's specific analytical framework here. The author uses terms like Trump version as a kind of impartial shorthand.
Right. It's to describe a systemic process. They view it as an upgrade, kind of like the post-war MacArthur model we'll get into.
And they argue that most people misunderstand this process because they're still stuck in the old logic.
The logic of the power society. They see a play for domination when the author claims the underlying logic is actually trying to transplant a new system.
One focused on individual independence and optimized governance.
To really get that claim, we have to start at the very bottom, with the basics.
The theory grounds human behavior in two traits. First, there's animal nature.
Which is selfish, tribal. It ultimately holds back progress.
And then there's human nature.
Which supports social characteristics, cooperation, evolution. And human history, in this view, is just the long, difficult story of human nature slowly overcoming animal nature.
So what's the trigger? What starts that movement?
The sources point to one single mechanism.
Language.
Language. It's defined as the critical generator of consensus. It's what links individual human brains together, and it's the starting gun for civilization.
And its structure, they argue, even determines how technology, and especially AI, will evolve.
And once language creates that basis for society, you see two dominant forms pop up.
Let's start with the power society.
Defined by animal nature being dominant. So you get top-down, centralized public power, a collective consciousness.
And a culture based on experience, right, where the ruling power just tells you what's right and wrong.
Exactly. And the civilization society is the mirror opposite.
Human nature is dominant.
So power is bottom-up. It comes entirely from the authorization of the people. It relies on individual independence, freedom, and a culture built on scientific logic and reason. On contract.
And you can actually trace this liberation of the individual across some major historical turning points.
Oh, yeah. It wasn't a sudden jump. You go back to Augustine in 413 AD.
With his idea of separating God's city from the secular city.
Which was the very first crack in that unified top-down ideology, the beginning of separating church and state.
Then you jump forward hundreds of years to the Magna Carta in 1215.
And that established the revolutionary idea that the king himself was not above the law.
So authority was starting to be constrained by a system, not just by one person's divine right.
Then the religious reform in the 16th century, Luther, Calvin, that just blew the doors open on individual ideology.
It challenged central religious authority, put personal faith at the center.
And that really accelerated the shift away from that monolithic collective way of thinking.
And then, finally, you get John Locke in the 17th century.
The philosopher who just completely negated the divine right of kings.
He's the one who really cemented the idea that power can only come from the consent of the people.
In that whole sequence, that's the story. That's the moment individual consciousness started to claim its rights and set the stage for our modern democratic structures.
There's a diagram in the sources that visualizes this.
It's a great visual. The power society is this dashed line of public power that's constantly going down as it fights against individual desires.
Until it hits what the author calls the public power turning point.
And at that point, the civilization society curve just skyrockets. It's a solid line representing private power and individual independence just increasing exponentially.
Because the system's authority is now flowing from the bottom up.
And that shift is so necessary because of the deeply dysfunctional culture the power society creates.
Which the author has a very specific name for, the giant baby phenomenon.
Yeah. Zhu. It literally means giant infant in Chinese.
Okay, so what is a giant baby in this context?
It describes individuals in a power society who are, perpetually infantilized. They're constantly controlled by a ruling class that acts like parent officials.
So because they're never allowed to make their own free choices and face the consequences?
They never develop true individual responsibility.
And the result of that is a society where people are fundamentally irresponsible. They're always blaming external forces or other people.
Exactly. And they lack that scientific or logical rigor for critical thinking. It creates a very strange, suffocating social environment.
Because the control mechanism is this experience culture. Truth isn't based on evidence, it's just based on what the officials say.
And speech is highly restricted. You're only allowed to show praise or positive energy. Any kind of critical inquiry is forbidden.
That's fascinating. And it connects to how these societies see personal development.
Yeah, the sources point out that in these cultures, when a child starts to develop autonomy, test boundaries, make independent choices.
It gets labeled the rebellious period.
Right. So a healthy part of human development is reframed as disobedience. It's seen as a challenge to the established control relationship.
It just shows that the power society can't handle internal challenges.
Which is why, to transition to a civilization society, individuals have to develop what the author calls subjectivity.
And that's not just having an opinion.
No, it's more than that. It's the ability to initiate choices, integrate those actions, and, most importantly, assume all the consequences of those choices.
But wait. If the power society systematically denies people the chance to do that, and it creates this culture of giant babies who are always looking for someone else to blame, then trying to introduce a system like democratic voting seems like it would be a disaster.
It is a disaster, because that subjectivity is the absolute prerequisite for responsibility. Without it, voting is easily corrupted.
It's meaningless. People can be manipulated by group emotion, or their votes can just be bought.
So to achieve that individual independence, you have to reject the habit of just believing what authority tells you.
You have to embrace scientific logic.
And you have to cultivate personal judgment. You have to constantly remind yourself that what other people say, even from a position of power, is just a description of their internal world. You have to verify it for yourself.
And that transition sounds incredibly hard. You have the entrenched interests of the ruling class on one side.
And on the other, you have masses of these giant babies who are either unable or just unwilling to take on responsibility because they've never had to.
So how does the change happen? This is where we get to the transition models.
Historically, yeah, it's often required massive conflict, like war.
But the source points to the MacArthur model, which was applied to Japan after World War II, as a more effective, though externally imposed, method.
The MacArthur model was a complete external restructuring of Japan's public power system from the bottom up. They installed a whole new constitutional framework.
But, and this is key, they protected certain stabilizing cultural elements, like the status of the emperor.
Exactly, which allowed the population to sort of save face and accept this massive new structure. The sources argue that model is now being upgraded for our digital age.
Which brings us back to the author's analysis of current U.S. politics. What they label the Trump version, or the energy around figures like Musk, is seen as an attempt at a second founding.
An upgrade to the U.S. national OS to fix bureaucratic corruption, what they call the deep state.
Again, just to be clear, this is the author's specific analytical framework.
Yes, and they use a hypothetical situation in Venezuela in 2026 with the Nobel laureate opposition leader Machado to show why the old logic fails here.
Okay, so if you apply the old power society logic, you'd expect the U.S. to just step in and install the moral opposition leader, right? She won, she has the high ground.
But the sources argue that approach often leads to total systemic failure,
They cite examples like Aung San Suu Kyi in Myanmar.
or the rapid institutional decay in post-Mandela South Africa. These moral leaders, however inspiring they are, often lack the structural governance capacity to actually run a state that's still rooted in these broken power society institutions.
They can't control the military, the bureaucracy, the economy.
So the author's MacArthur upgrade logic suggests a different path.
Oh, hold on. If the civilization society is supposed to be bottom-up and based on freedom, isn't the MacArthur model, or this so-called Trump version, just another form of top-down control? Doesn't that violate the whole principle?
That's the critical question. The source argues the imposition is temporary and purely structural. The focus is on first clearing out the highest levels of corrupted leadership, the entrenched interests.
While maintaining basic functions with the existing staff.
And then you thoroughly modify the rules and reconstruct the core power structure. You transplant the upgraded OS.
So power is only returned to a full democracy after the institutional machinery is modernized and working properly?
Precisely. It's not about moral leadership first. It's about systemic capacity. The institutions have to be free from corruption before the people can safely wield that bottom-up power.
The author says this is the most effective path, even if the actions needed to get there look unseemly or shameless to people who prioritize moral purity over function.
And if we follow this whole trajectory to its end, the ultimate goal is what the author calls the Human Operating System, or HOS.
For the global village.
The HOS is envisioned as this unified legal system for the whole globe. It would replace all the fragmented national systems.
And it would have to conform to human nature, natural laws, and ultimately maximize individual freedom for everyone.
The later stage of this, which the author calls the Musk AI version, actually uses AI to manage the state.
To eliminate bureaucracy and corruption?
And in this system, crime is simplified dramatically. Crime is defined as nothing more than infringing upon another person's freedom.
And the enforcement method is fascinating. It's not about state coercion.
No. AI provides credit scores based entirely on your criminal behavior, how often you interfere with others' freedom.
So if you have a low score, you're not arrested by the police. You were just restricted.
Restricted by the invisible hand of free choice. You can't get into high-quality online communities or platforms, which are the new social structures.
And because so much of modern life is virtual, that's a powerful punishment. It forces accountability.
You have to improve your behavior to get back in.
The sources also suggest AI could act as a kind of third-party payment system for communication.
Yeah, imagine an AI standing between two people in a conversation, clarifying ambiguous language, correcting cognitive biases in real time.
And then generating a verified shared understanding. A consensus.
Which can then be formalized into a perfect contract.
That would resolve so much human conflict. It would make the contract spirit of the civilization society totally ubiquitous and unambiguous.
And while we're waiting for that HOS, we can see the early versions of these frameworks in things like the G7 and the CPTPP.
The G7 is basically the core value club. Membership isn't about GDP, it's about institutional logic.
Right. Protection of private property, power derived from the people, and power that is strictly constrained by law.
It rejects any system that says power is unlimited or that the individual is just a tool for the state.
And then you have the CPTPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The source calls this a technological and institutional testing ground for a free global order.
And what's amazing about CPTPP is the diversity of its members. They're all at different levels of development, different cultures.
But they share an extremely high commitment to legally enforceable rules on labor rights, intellectual property, transparent law, state-owned enterprises.
So the real barrier to entry isn't how rich your country is, it's your governance capability.
Can you predictably and impartially enforce the rules? It's a test. Can a free economic order be sustained just by the force of rules without everyone having to share the exact same ideology?
And this really sets up the problem with our current international system.
The sources argue that international laws, like the UN Charter, are mostly ineffective.
Because they make a fundamental and flawed assumption.
They assume that all member states have already reached the civilization society level, that they all share the same values and contract spirit.
Which, as we've just discussed with power societies and the giant baby phenomenon, is clearly not true for a huge part of the world.
You're trying to build a consensus system on a foundation of deeply subjective, often totally antagonistic, individual operating systems.
And this is where the whole theory really snaps into philosophical focus.
Yeah, we've seen that progress is this move toward freedom and accountability. And the mechanism is consensus.
But getting to that consensus is unbelievably difficult because of the fundamental subjectivity of how we perceive everything.
Think about the philosopher Wittgenstein.
Hmm.
He said language is like a broken clock. It only occasionally points to the right time.
And the source just drives this point home. What you perceive, color, touch, political reality, it's all subjective.
Your brain is just interpreting signals. A bee sees UV light on a flower that you can't see. Your dog sees different colors. The grass isn't inherently green. It's green because your subjective brain processes the signal that way.
We are all, at the end of the day, living in our own subjective world.
Which makes the simple act of genuine communication, let alone forging a global consensus, this monumental constant struggle.
It's the ultimate barrier. It's why systems like the UN can't fully work.
And so the source material concludes with this really powerful, provocative thought. It argues that this constant effort to build consensus, to build better operating systems for society, it's all driven by a deep, fundamental human need.
It says, we spend our entire lives looking for someone we can talk to, someone who can listen to us, understand us, and listen to our nonsense.
And that seemingly simple desire, it requires so much luck to actually find.
So this deep dive really shows that the whole effort to build a global civilization society, with its rules and contracts and AI managers, it's really just the collective, scaled-up human struggle for mutual understanding.
For a true connection in a world that is, by its very nature, defined by our own subjective reality. That need is the fuel. That's what's driving the evolution of the national OS.